Cool. Okay, brilliant. I reckon we can probably get going with this, which is the third one of the series of coach development webinars that we're putting on over the winter. There's been one a month since June, and we'll go through till November, and there'll end up being 7 in the series in total. Just as a recap, the purpose of these is to try and provide some continuing development for coaches in the club and class association space across the country. Most of the facilitators and presenters are from our Performance Pathways teams around the country, as well as a number of next level coaches. As I said a minute ago, this session is being recorded and they'll all be available online via the Coach Hub eventually when they're all uploaded. And with that, I'll pass over to tonight's facilitators and presenters, Jamie Snavely and Brady Lowe. So over to you guys.
Thanks, Ian. Jamie and I got, we volunteered ourselves to do coaching outside your experience. And I think part of the reason I certainly put my hand up is that I've done a lot of coaching outside my experience. I'm currently in The Hague in the beautiful sunny Netherlands, and I'm here coaching the Australian Sailing Team 49er program, having never sailed a 49er race in my life. And it's been a bit of a theme for my coaching, coaching at the Moth Worlds. I had a little bit more experience moth sailing. I had at least 400 capsizes in the course of my moth sailing career, but coached several sailors who were in the top 10 at the Perth Worlds, and have just generally been the kind of person who said, yeah, I'll figure that out in my coaching career with various classes. And I came through the ranks of being an instructor at my home club when I finished high school, trying to earn some dollars, and just ended up kind of falling into sailing as a profession, into sailing coaching as a profession, and coached everything from schools teams racing to optimists, lasers for a fair period of time. And yeah, more recently I've been coaching in South Australia as the South Australian State Institute program head coach, where I've worked with 470s. Again, not a lot of 470 sailing experience in my life, as well as taking on some IQ foil coaching, occasionally some kiting coaching, really a whole heap of different kind of activities. And since the start of this year, I've been working with the Australian Sailing Team 49er program as the National Futures Program coach. But I've been actually in Europe for about 4 months now, coaching the Australian Sailing Team through 3 World Cup events, the Olympic Test event in Marseille, and now I'm here for the World Sailing Championships, which is our first opportunity as a country to qualify for next year's Olympic Games. Jamie?
Cool, thanks Brady. I'm Jamie. I've been Opti coaching for quite some time now, and I'm actually in New York. It's 4:30 a.m. my time at the moment, coaching Optis. But the past 2 years or so, I've been branching out into coaching for 20s, which I also sailed. But I've had the pleasure of coaching sailors that are, to be honest, better than me and have gone further than I have. So I've had the challenge of figuring out how I can add value and actually, coach them when I haven't been where they have been. I'm also on the Next Level Coaching Scholarship and being mentored by Ash Brunning to look at coaching other classes similar to Brady that I've never really sailed myself before. So I've been in the coach boat with coaches coaching the 470, the IQ foil, the 49er, and looking at how I can add value and understand what's going on, even though I haven't been there personally. And it's a bit of a challenge, and I feel I've developed a bit of a process over the past couple of years that has made this easier, that I'm hoping to share with you.
Cool. Well, we're going to roll through our presentation this evening, but we try and like to make this as interactive as possible. And given that the range of Jamie and I's experience kind of is a pretty broad scattergun of sailing, really welcoming of questions, particularly in the chat, is probably the best way to do it, as well as providing and finding out a little bit of information about who we're talking to. We've got a heap of slides that we're kind of not super committed to working through if people start coming up with stuff that's more directly relevant to them and what they want to get out of it. I'm initially going to start with a bit of the process that I've developed for class hopping and experience hopping in terms of different people that I've coached and different processes, and a really easy way or simple way that I kind of view what I'm trying to achieve all the time with different classes and different sailors. And then we're going to go into some, Jamie's going to cover off a little bit on some group working with groups, but this kind of topic covers a broad range of different challenges. And I'm sure there'll be a broad range of different challenges that people have or think they have with coaching different groups. So really keen, various points I'm gonna ask some questions out to the coaches and just see where people's kind of direction on this lands. Jamie and I were talking when we kind of got together and started thinking about this in relevance to this. It's like, what is good coaching? And I think there's a few different things that we did kind of settle on. And one of the ones that's front and center is it's not always knowing all the answers. And I've got this photo that I found of Ineos. I was trying to find a couple of better ones from the latest America's Cup, because I always look at these photos of boats and like do a lot of fast boat coaching. And I always look at the sails on America's Cup boats and I always go, why are they so deep? And I've never come up with an answer. But it's always a challenge in my mind that I'm always going to try and understand why. Every time I see something about sailing, I'm going to try and understand a little bit more. But I'm also going to try and have conversations with the sailors that I work with about why they think. Currently, I'm coaching, 6 49er athletes who've got 6 different opinions on how things work, 6 different viewpoints on how to make a boat go fast. Hopefully those kind of line up, that the skipper and crew have a similar idea, but not always. As a coach, I think my biggest job tends to be facilitating that conversation, trying to get the most out of what the experts in that class have, or what people's experiences with that class are, and just to try and help them come to better conclusions. In the process, I'll probably come to some better conclusions myself. I'll develop a bit more knowledge, but I'm not necessarily focusing on developing that knowledge being my primary goal. Trying to give new perspectives to sailors as a coach that comes at coaching from a lack of experience in their class, it's mainly about providing new challenges and asking different questions and providing just different opinions and different challenges to the sailors about how they're going to approach their day. Ultimately, like this last one is the most critical thing, knowing what not to say as much as what to say and when to say it. There's lots of different information and opinions and knowledge, but timing is everything and understanding is everything. As coaches, I think it's way less important to understand some of the critical 5 or 1%ers in sailing as much as it is to try and understand the 20%ers in people, because trying to get sailors to understand and buy in and listen and challenge is a very tricky exercise. And so when we think about coaching in terms of the sport, we're coaching people as much as we're coaching sailing. And when you're coaching outside your experience this term, I think it's like a really good opportunity to free yourself a little bit of needing to know the sailing answers. And it's a little bit more of an opportunity to try and have more conversations about using what sailors know, using what you know that's outside kind of the scope, as well as just trying to build a bit more of an opportunity for sailors to be a little bit more free in their thinking. I'm going to ask at this point if everyone can just throw into the chat what classes they currently are coaching or working with, like the level. So it might be like you just say like, Greenfleet, coaching adults in keelboats, whatever it is. If you just want to just start throwing those things into the chat, just so we're starting to get an idea of who we're talking to and what kind of levels of experience we've got while we move forward into the next section. Who's going to get started in the chat? Nice. Got one for team sailing. Coach management, that's coaching in and of itself. That's a bit of open skiff, and I call it laser. It's a challenge now. Everyone around here is calling that Ilka. Okay. So while we get some of those comments in, and while my thing keeps beeping, I'm going to cover off on my approach. And this is a really simple one that I came up with in a notebook in an airport one day while I was traveling around doing a bit of coaching. And I came up with this little acronym for trying to work out how I was breaking down sessions as I was jumping from class to class. And I have this quite simple idea of MAST, which is that all of my sessions or all of my coaching falls into one of 4 areas: mindset and mentality, athleticism, skills, handling, maneuvering, the ability to control what's in your hands and what's under your feet, and then the technical component. So for a lot of coaches who might be jumping into new challenging classes, the technical component is all that stuff that's not in your hands. So might be spinning handles on stay wires, might be things like centerboards. I'd love, one of my favorite sailing experiences was in the 505 because you could touch, control just about everything, which is just a great head spin. You just go down some really wacky ideas of how to make a boat go fast when you can change a centerboard in like 3 dimensions. But I kind of looked at it and I divided it down into that little 4 corners. I'm not talking about like racing and tactics and strategy. We'll get to that later. This is purely about like boats going through the water. And by breaking it down into that kind of 4 corners, and then particularly understanding the difference in the way I was thinking about skills versus technical, it allows me to simplify it a little bit in terms of what I'm trying to achieve, or even just what I'm trying to look at. So for me, diving into this 49er world, there's a really strong bias towards the technical, about making 1 and 2 millimeter adjustments of wires, but not necessarily a view on controlling what's in the hand of the sailor, so the steering and the sheeting, because the sailors had just kind of gone down the technical avenue. So in my head, I was already breaking down what that looked like. And so my sessions and my coaching tends to fall into various corners depending on the needs of the sailor and the session. And so for me, these are all different coaching opportunities and situations that I have. So I've done a bit of yacht sailing. So for me, teaching a new bowman how to operate a dip pole spinnaker is a skills exercise. Might be a little bit of athleticism, but it's normally like a judgment call of going, how is this person going to perform this job? Or maybe it's someone who wants opinion or wants some coaching on how to do that job. And in my mind, it's a skills problem. What are the skills that we need? What are we actually trying to execute based on what's in our hand? The owner's got the budget to change over the size of the topping lift, or maybe buy a new carbon pole. But in terms of the bowmen themselves, all they've got to bring is their skills. And so that's what we're going to work with. If I look at how I would often coach a laser session, laser heavily athletic class, if we're talking about trying to gain performance. So a big low hanging fruit in my mind is let's work on technique and form in hiking, how we're going to have a sustainable hiking posture for a particular sailor, asking them questions about what they feel, like, is your back sore? Where does it hurt? Is it your knees? If so, bad. Is it your quads? It's probably okay. And what work are you going to do to get better? Now, I certainly will say that in my sailing, athleticism probably not a strong corner in my own skill set or my own way of thinking about sailing. Doesn't enter into my mind a lot. And when it does, I have to do a fair bit of work off the boat to make sure that I'm okay in that area. But I know that I do have the capacity to break down an understanding of the athletic component. So like a good example for some of the examples that I've seen popping up as we go through here is like those who are looking at the skiffs. Is like a really good one of the FX like boats. I assume that's something like a BS or a Formula 15 or something. Trap skills versus hiking, much lower threshold in terms of the athletic sustaining like stamina in a skiff in terms of the explosive power. So like you've got to be able to run and you've got to be able to jump and you've got to be able to swing and hang off your arms. But once you're actually in the trapezing position, it's a lot less physical load on the body. Whereas hiking for a taser, for example, particularly like coaching, say, masters sailors who might have decided they're going to jump back in the taser, like great boat for husband and wife combos, or someone who's been keel boating and wants to jump back in a dinghy. Bit of a consideration for the club coach is like, got to make sure this person's hiking properly. Got to think about whether or not they're going to hurt themselves, short or long term. Where am I going to get information? How am I going to help them in that area? And so by breaking it down into these areas, I think it stops what a lot of coaching challenges, which is getting sidetracked and delving backwards and forwards between these areas. It's not to say you can't kind of engage in multiple areas, but I usually give myself a pretty simple rule in a session, even like coaching Australian sailing team, never more than one in one of these boxes if we're doing like all of it, or we're looking at one particular area and we'll have 2 or 3 points around a component in terms of skills. Maybe there'll be a piece on some other particular area, but they're the focus points, something to bring us back to. And I just look at it in that kind of corner, in that kind of way of splitting it into like simple corners and just going, how can I keep this as simple as possible in terms of what I'm seeing and what I'm trying to help with and what questions I'm trying to ask? Because once we go into like those corners and going like, am I asking the right questions? I think it makes it a lot easier in terms of breaking down those skills. I also like using this as a bit of a thought provoker for where I am on my coaching journey. So for me, most of my coaching in this environment that I'm in here now has been mentality, working with communication between skippers and crews, what skippers and crews are feeling and thinking, how they're interacting with one another to come up with the right decisions. Because for most of them, like we have a very common discussion that we're all capable as a squad of being in the top 10 in the world. So why aren't we always in the top 10 in the world? Because the skills are there, the technical ability is there, the athleticism is certainly there. So is it shifts in mindset? How do we get the most out of ourselves more often? How do we communicate better as a skipper or crew? So with that in mind, I want to have a little bit of a crack at this. And what I want to do is, for those that have put down there in their class, I want them to have a bit of a think about what the area is they're most comfortable coaching in. So are you most comfortable like as an opti coach coaching the skills of opti sailing? What's in the hands? How to use main sheet, how to jump on your feet, and what's the thing you're least comfortable with? So for me, if I was jumping into coach optis, I can tell you the thing that I would probably be most confident coaching is athleticism. Like physically, what have you got to do to be the right size and shape and like work out in an opti what you're going to do well? What's the thing I'm going to understand the least? And those sail tie things, zero understanding from me. Like what the, like there's like a guide for how you're supposed to do it properly. I'm sure when I see a sail up, it'll be like, it kind of looks right or wrong. Technical, no hope. Talk about like mass rake on an opti, nah, zero idea. So in the chat, I want you to throw in your comfortable area and the area that you look at and be like, oh, help. Give us a go.
Hey Brady, maybe just pop in MAST subheadings into the chat, if you could,
Oh, yep, sorry.
just as a point of reference.
I'll just go back to the I'll go back to the slide. So there you go.
Nice, perfect.
Formula 15. Good at skills, least at technical. Where are you, Michael? Let's need to be my my guinea pig for the moment. You want to unmute yourself? Can we hear you, Michael? No, maybe not.
Hang on, he's just said he doesn't know how to unmute himself. Let me see if I can do it. No, you have to do yourself, Michael. Next, there's a little mic picture. You should be able to click. You should have a line across it at the moment. Click on it and it'll unline it.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Can you hear me
Perfect.
now?
Yeah, so Michael, interested to, so sorry for, well, no, I'm not sorry for calling you out. So obviously the skills component, you've been a skiffy before, I assume, and so moving through the boat's a natural thing, maybe?
Yes. Well, I started with Turrets and 18-foot skiffs many years ago, but obviously every class is different. I actually coach from within the boat, so I train skippers and crews separately, or coach them separately, which means I get to exercise my own, work out what works best, and then pass it on to the next group.
Yeah, I've done a fair bit of that where I like to jump in the boat, and like it's hilarious. My sailors find it so funny because I usually preempt it with, this is going to look rubbish, but let me have a chance to feel this or understand this. I think that's important. I think it's a really good a good method. And with the technical stuff, do you find that the technical component is something you're fearful of, or you just find it a challenge to understand? Maybe like there's a lot of concepts going on.
I sort of understand it. I just don't think I'm good enough. You know, I've never been one who sort of can spend a lot of time fine-tuning something, going out, seeing if that works or doesn't work. I'm a bit lazy in that area. So I don't pretend that I can walk up to a boat and say, that rig's too tight, this is not right, you know, fix that. Yeah, I think other people are better at that than I am. So I'm a bit cautious about how I do it. I can bring them to a certain level. And after that, I sort of have to say, well, go and talk to Barry. He's a bit better at it than I am.
Yeah, I think that's a really valid point, and I think that's probably going to be something that comes up a lot. And I think like looking through the chat at the moment, there's quite a fair bit of differences between those who sit in the mentality corner and those who necessarily sit maybe across skills and technical. I look at athleticism. People don't default to athleticism necessarily, because I think those that do it as part of their sailing don't think about it dramatically because it's just a fact of life. Whereas those who need to, like, probably shy away from it. There'll always be an area, I think, that you will naturally want to not get involved in. I think you've hit on some of those really key things there. So like for technical, people think that attention to detail is really critical. And I think that's generally valid, because I think what we are often expected of as coaches is to know the answers, but it's not about knowing the answers. One of the key things that I've had, and the moth class for me was an incredibly liberating experience because nobody knows the answers. The difference between people in that class in a year of sailing was 1.5 knots in speed from one worlds to the next. So like people getting the answers, and we're talking about like at the Perth Worlds, there was 2 people in the top 20 who weren't a Volvo sailor, an Olympic sailor, or an America's Cup sailor. So they don't know the answers. They're making it up as they go along. And I think it's a very liberating thing to understand that if you do understand the concepts, even some of the concepts, go that far, even some of the concepts, I think what you can't do is you can't, as you say, you can't walk up to the boat and go, oh, I feel like that rig's too tight. But you are in a position as a coach, I think, to ask the questions. And that's certainly like my experience here in 49er land is just asking questions. Do you think it should be this or that? And I think for a lot of us who have spent a long period of our lives looking at sailboats, sometimes we get that intuition for looking at a boat and go, something doesn't look right here, but I don't know what it is. And as coaches, because we don't necessarily know the why, we might be a little bit more afraid to say it. One of the things I'd say to you about coaching, that term, coaching outside your experience, is I think what it does is it gives you an open license to throw that kind of comment and go, I'm not really sure, but that doesn't look right. Or can you explain why it's that? And like, I think the ability to ask those questions, and again, I'll preface that by saying like right time is critical. But in training environments, for example, like in my experience with the 49er, quite a few times I've asked, and persistently, I'm pretty persistent about asking things that I don't know about that I think are wrong. Asking the question, why don't we do it that way? Like, I'm just trying to understand, and you can kind of help a sailor understand something that they might be unaware of. It's like, just help me out here. Like, why are you doing it that way? It doesn't make sense. In my experience, it doesn't make sense. So like, what's different about this boat? I'll give you a hint. In a lot of cases, and in a lot of classes, there are things that happen not because of any logic, but just because that's the way things have always been done, or because one person in the fleet makes it work. But sailing's really complicated. You can do like 7 things wrong, but the 3 things you're doing right are so right that you can jump forward. I think if you have the technical understanding, whatever technical understanding you've amassed across whatever classes you've sailed or coached, you have a right to ask the question. More importantly, if someone's asking you to coach them, I think, and Jamie's going to get onto this a bit later, I think, with how we communicate with the group, I think you've got a ticket to ask questions. And like, for sure, I love doing stuff like walking up to like a batten. It's a bit tight. I don't really understand, like, what's going on here? And I think when you can do it effectively, teaming it up with asking questions and doing it in the right way, I think like one of 2 things will happen. Either your understanding of why your intuition is wrong will increase, and so your intuition will get better. Intuition is just the product of learned experience. Or you'll actually stumble across things that other people are doing wrong, but you'll do it in such a way that they'll be probably a little bit more open to it. How's that? I'm just conscious of time, so I want to kind of keep moving forward. I'd love to get some of these in there, but there's some really good responses in the chat, and it's just interesting to see how people view their position. And like, I could do exercise on this all day, but I won't. I think understanding what you like and what you don't like, and what you're good at versus what you might struggle with and what you might need to understand is really important. And areas where you don't necessarily feel comfortable is a great place to start in boats that you don't know. So asking laser sailors about why they hike the way they do, if you've come off a fin or a taser where the boat's actually been designed to hike off, you can really get to understand why someone's doing something the way they are and why maybe it's right or wrong if athleticism is not your comfort area. I'm going to hand over to Jamie now, who's going to cover off on a bit of the work here in groups. I think she's had a lot of experience working across different groups, jumping from country to country and with various programs. So yeah, we'll keep progressing forward. But yeah, a bit of my thinking there, and hopefully something for everyone to take out of it in terms of their planning and the way they think about sessions, and particularly with a view to like areas of discomfort in coaching.
Cool. Thanks, Brady. I know personally that I've used that MAST concept, and it can be really helpful in directing your attention to something that you have as a strength in your coaching rather than stressing over something you're really struggling with. So we're going to look at 4 different challenges that you might face with coaching above your ability. I'm sure there's plenty more challenges than just this, but we're going to touch on these ones and how to move through them. So I hope you find them helpful. So the first challenge is building trust with a new group. Second challenge, the sailor knows more than I do. Challenge 3, how to coach racing and approach that, especially if they're racing at a higher level than you. And challenge 4, the unknown, which there is plenty of. There's a lot of things you don't even know you don't know when you're coaching above your ability. So can we go next slide? So we're going to touch on building trust with a new group, which I think, and I think Brady thinks this too, is kind of the foundation and where you need to start when you're coaching above your ability. If you don't have trust, even if you have all the answers, it doesn't really matter, because it's not the message that's taught, it's the message that's heard. And if they don't trust you and you don't have buy-in from your sailors, they're not going to hear you properly. So this is the starting place when you have a new group. Let's go next slide. So these are some things that you might anticipate your sailors to say, or they might even be things that are just stuck in your head. So things like, why should I listen to you? How do I know I can trust what you say? We prefer blank to coach us. What results have you achieved in sailing? And these are, questions that I think are pretty normal to wrestle with. And if you do face these questions, know that it's not you specific, and that most coaches feel this. So I've got a photo of Ted Lasso, sorry, to the right, if you just go back one. And I think this is quite relevant. I don't know how many of you have watched the show, but I highly recommend it. And it's about an American coach. He's got an American football background, and he moves to the UK to coach English football, and he doesn't know a single thing about it. And initially there's a lot of hostility, and the English football players, it's Premier League, so they're pretty good. They find the culture of how Ted runs things quite different, and there's a bit of tension. But what comes through, and Ted actually changes the team, is that Ted really cares, and he's really invested in the team. Can we go to the next slide, Brady? So Ted works on building credibility with the sailors by how much he cares. And back on the MAST concept of how there's different areas you can focus on, Ted doesn't actually focus on the football specifics. He actually begins with culture, which is something that a technical coach might not have looked at and overseen. And that's actually something that has the biggest impact on this team. So a few things with building credibility with your sailors. The first thing is it's not showing what you know. And they won't care how much you know until they know how much you care. So I I remember hearing from Sarah Winter, who does a lot with the Ilkas for Australian sailing and is a quite a good sailor in her own right, share when she was a sailor that she actually sailed her best when she had a coach that was fully in her corner. And that was more important to her than the technical information at regattas. So there's so much value, and it's a massive strength for the sailor to realize how much you care and that you're in their corner no matter what. And that can look like, if there is an unknown, finding out the answer and putting in the work to research it and discuss it with them and flesh it out. The second thing is allow time to develop relationships. So it can be very person dependent. You might find it actually takes a lot more time to build credibility with certain people. And that might not necessarily be a reflection on you doing something wrong. Sometimes it does just take time. But the most important thing here is that you consistently keep showing up, and that you do what you say. So if you say that you're going to look into something, you actually do. And that's what builds trust for them to rely on you, and to feel as though you're in their corner. With a 420 team that I was coaching, I felt really stuck on how to help them. Their technical skills were above mine, and I felt that's what they needed. So a way I felt I built trust was not by having all the answers, but by filming their upwinds, replaying them in my own time, and talking to other coaches about what they saw in this video, and then coming back to them and sharing what I had discussed and gone out and seen. And I think from that, they saw that I really cared, and I didn't know all the answers, but I was willing to do as much as I could to help them. And we can go next slide. So there's a lot of value in sometimes actually not knowing the answers, because it allows your sailors to self-learn. And your role predominantly is to facilitate this process. So I've actually heard Brady say that a part of your job as a coach is to help the sailors do their best thinking. So that isn't just telling them the answer, it's actually drawing out where they need to direct their attention and articulating what's going on in their head. You might have some sailors that are really intuitive, but to be able to replicate that performance, they need to understand what they actually did well. So by asking questions, you can draw that out of them, and they might not have even realized that was in their head. But you have effectively coached them by helping them see that. Present as an honest version of yourself. Be confident in what you do know, and be confident in saying what you don't. And I think this is really important, because sailors can see through if you're not sure. So just show up as you are, be real with them. And I know for me, that takes the pressure off. I can be more authentic in my own coaching and my own strengths when I share with the sailors, look, I actually don't know that, but this is what I can do for you, and I really care, and I'll help you as much as I can. When I first started coaching this 420 team that I was talking about, I felt a lot of internal pressure to coach technique and skills, because that's what I presumed they wanted to know. But that wasn't a strength of mine. I could try help them, but somewhere down the line, I think just in conversation, I realized that their communication needed a lot of work. And for me, that is something that I'm really interested in, and that have read up a lot on, and I found I was able to help them in that aspect. And that was showing up as an honest version of myself, saying what I didn't know. And it does take courage. It can be scary and intimidating. And there might be a fear that they'll respect you less. But in my experience, they respect you more, because when you do say what you know, they know that you really back it and you're being honest. And finally, with building credibility, be willing to put in the work and keep learning. Research your own questions, and talk to people who know the answers. So an example of a part of my process is back to this 420 group. They were doing something in particular on the wire where they were getting out on the wire in really light wind and sitting in the boat. And I was working with another coach, and she intuitively knew, like, I don't think you should do that. What is that achieving? But we couldn't quite get to the bottom of like why you shouldn't do that or why you should do that. So what we did was sat behind their boat whilst they sailed upwind and filmed them. And we said, all right, do the thing you're doing, now don't do it. And we watched the video and just came back to the general principles of, okay, so how does the sail shape look when they do this thing? What changes? What impact does it have on the boat? And it became a discussion with the sailors as well. And I think there was a deeper learning in them, in sharing our learning process with them, because it taught them that they were actually also capable of figuring out whether something in particular works and the thought process there. So share your process with your sailors as well, because they will learn so much from that. So we have a discussion question, and might actually get off mute and share verbally, because I'm hoping a few stories might come through on what have you found helpful or unhelpful in building credibility with your sailors. So jump off mute, pop your cameras on, don't be shy, and share anything. Someone be brave.
Come on, somebody's got to be brave and come forward.
Hi.
Kingsley. Perfect.
Yeah, hi. So I'm going to jump straight into this one because it happened in this group 2 meetings ago, where I made a comment and said that you needed to have spoken the answer before you actually asked the question. And Trax picked up on that last meeting and had a discussion around it. And this actually hits right on this as to how helpful or unhelpful it's been in building credibility. But obviously, I'm building credibility with you. And one of the things that came out of that is that I stopped me when Trax made some comments about it, and it stopped me and got me thinking about where I'd come from that, and also what did I need to do about it. And I absolutely agree with you don't have the answers, and it's quite okay to ask and not have the answers. The trick, where I was coming from in my head at that particular moment, was actually around, I didn't want to make the sailors feel wrong or feel bad. So it wasn't about exploring an answer, it was about making them feel bad. And that comes back to you, Brady, what you were saying earlier on about knowing what to ask and what not to ask, and being prepared to stick your head out or not, as the case may be. So I stuck my head out and got it lopped off, and yeah, that's where I am now.
Yeah, that's a good one. It's funny you say about like not wanting them to feel wrong. I think one of the interesting ones in terms of, and this is again understanding and reading who you're coaching, is one of the things you can do for sailors who are a lot more experienced. And when I say a lot more, like when you've been asked to work with a team who are very experienced, or you're helping out someone at the club who might have a lot of experience, I think building that level of trust, one of the big things that building trust allows you to do is tell someone when, or challenge them when they are wrong.
Yeah.
And I think like every rule is always governed by its exception. And so, yeah, I think in that area, I have one sailor on my team here, for example, who's got a lot of experience. And I know that for him, the best thing that he gets out of me is me challenging him and telling him when he's wrong. Because whereas other sailors may not, like their sensitivity may be different to that, may not look, they really need to be taken to the correct answer without feeling the confrontation. So yeah, I think that part of it, I think it's a good self-assessment tool for sure. Like a good way of thinking about what, like, there's no point having the knowledge if you're not sure on the delivery.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Kingsley. Anyone else? Otherwise, we might press on.
Surely someone else has got some got
Yeah.
something.
I'll throw something in. It's really important that it's a two-way process, not just the coach telling them what to do or whatever. And what works really effectively for me is that if I ask them to try something, what I want them to do then is give me feedback on, did it work? Did it make things better? Was it worse? Try to get them understanding what you're trying to get them to do. And the more they understand it, the more they learn. So it's a lot of just trying to get them thinking about their sailing.
Yeah, definitely. It's the message heard, not the message taught.
Yeah.
So it's reading the person and seeing if it's sunk in, and it might require a different way for the message to sink in for them versus another person.
Yeah.
I think that's a really great
well,
point.
I would probably say too, at building credibility, like we talked about before, showing your care is really important. I think that's really a foundation of building credibility.
Yeah, definitely. Nothing else matters if they don't care.
Yeah, well, it's also a bit like caring about how they went in a regatta or so forth. So often they'll come in, the kids will come in, and you'll say to them, how did you go? And they'll tell you where they placed. But often I'll say to them, that's good, but how do you feel you went? Is there anything else we need to talk about or anything like that, instead of just worrying about where they placed? And then they get that you care a bit.
Yeah, definitely. And caring about the right things, like what actually matters, what they can control. Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, a lot of it is of good coaching is like redirecting their focus onto the right things. So if they are really focusing in on a result, whether that's letting them feel great or bad, it's redirecting them on what actually matters. And that comes from caring.
Yeah.
Can I just add one little thing, cut me off when you want to? I mainly teach women 20 to 40 years old, and they're often not all that experienced. So a very important part of that is actually dealing with them as individuals. I learned very quickly they're not an amorphous group of people. You've got to understand each one. Some of them come into it quite nervous. You've got to deal with it in a way that they're not, you calm them down, you take them through. I suppose each person gets treated as an individual, and that makes a big difference in getting both that feeling of caring and trust. I could joke and say my wife says I do the training for free, but I really should charge for the psychological input that I give to them. It's a joke, not meant to be serious. But it's an important part of it. They're all individuals. They are all different, and in a way, you need a different approach to each person.
Yeah.
Yeah, without doubt. I think one of the challenges, it's interesting like this, the topic. It would be a very interesting presentation, but it'd be interesting to know how many ears it would fall deaf on around coaches or sailors who have a high level of expertise or experience and understanding how they can effectively communicate that to individuals. Because I think, Jamie said it a couple of times, it's the send receive. There are a lot of extremely capable, competent sailors and coaches who have a very high level of technical understanding or have a really great, the classic one for most people is like the person who sails really well but has no idea how they do it or can't communicate how they do it. And I think that's a big one, like with the credibility building, is like the easiest default is like, I've done this in my sailing. As a coach, increasingly, my challenge to that is interesting. They can do that. How well can they communicate how they did it? And then how well do they understand the variables? And so the technical and skills part of it and the people part of it, it's no different. It's all one like amorphous challenge or swinging pendulum. And like the personality part of it, understanding individuals, like in my mind is that pretty open about. I think that's the secret to success in a high performance environment, just like it's a secret to success in teaching tackers or learn to sail or putting someone on your yacht for the first time. If you figure the person out to some extent, I think the success rate and proportion is incredibly high of passing on what you understand and helping come to the right answer.
Yeah, definitely. Like so much of it is just helping them be the best they can be on the water. So if you understand the person, you're on track to figuring that out. All right, shall we move on? That was really great discussion. Thank you, everyone.
I think we can probably, like, we've got a little bit more and we're starting to cover off on some of this stuff. And I'd really like to, in the time that we have left, just hear a little bit from people's challenges, because when I look at this challenge, I was like, surely someone's had this one, but I'd just like to hear some various challenges that the group has. I'm conscious of time. I'd like to open it up for people to have a bit of questions, if you're happy with that, Jamie.
Yeah, for sure.
And just hear what, like, while you've got, and there are also some other pretty awesome coaches in the discussion as well, just sitting back and listening themselves. I'd like to hear some other challenges that people have, and feel free to be as, without the naming names, be as specific as you want around the challenges that you have and maybe some strategies or maybe some advice you'd like to get out of the group.
I'm happy to. Oh, go.
Yeah.
Sorry, Ian. Go in.
Yeah, and I'm happy to put myself on the line here, Brady and Jamie, as just to kick us off, and hopefully other people will jump in after me. I've done a bit of coaching with some kite foiling. I can't go beyond about 20 meters on a kite foil myself. So in that instance, the people I'm coaching are clearly better than me. What sort of advice do you think would be useful for how I could, like, provide value to a group of kite foilers that can race and get around a course well?
Yeah, so I reckon...
random class that's new and emerging, that there's not a great deal of knowledge of in the country, and limited personal experience with the actual craft myself.
If you can kite foil 20 meters, I reckon you can actually kite foil further. You can certainly kite foil further than the coaches in the space that I know. Because, as you say, it's such a new class that the coaches who work with it aren't kite foilers for the most part. There's a few that are, but it's interesting, the top sailors, like I'd say the top 20 in the world, there's very few kite foilers amongst the coaches. Because there's just an awareness that the thing that the sailor is doing well is foiling the kite and, doing the thing. What they're probably not doing well is all the other stuff that goes around it, which is racing. Maybe not necessarily, the coach doesn't even necessarily have to have a technical understanding of how it works, but a process. Like, what's their process for getting better? So if you are a technically minded person, and I'll say that, like, person, I don't think it even relates to sailing, because, like, sailing tends to draw on a lot of people with an engineering mindset. What's your process for taking apart a problem? Because teaching that in a simplified way is coaching, and it's very valuable, sailing coaching, because if you can be a little bit more, if you can improve the rigid thinking of someone, and like kite foil's a real great example, because the boat park, particularly initially, is a lot of people who are like, yeah, this is sick, and have no idea how to race, and no idea how to actually think through the process of, like, what makes their kite go faster, even just in their own head. Work out where the weaknesses are, because a lot of people in that world, and this is like a big one in that board board space area. People have really good feel, really good understanding for what feels quick. They don't necessarily have a great understanding for refining a process to go like, okay, that feels quick. What are the little 1%ers that I'm going to change? Yeah, so I hope that that's kind of a bit of an answer. It's just thinking about where there's a likely weakness going to be. Kite's a super easy one. Well, actually, funnily enough, right now it's getting harder because that's happened, and now people are realizing it's just like every other Olympic class. It's now getting into refinement, and so those little changes, everyone who's got the super good feel is actually starting to fall back now as all the people who are meticulous move forward because they're just getting quicker.
Yeah, I think no, that's good. And I think that sort of highlights, and it's one of the reasons I use the kite as an example. Then in that situation, that highlights what you started this session around with the MAST theory around where can I give value, and it's not in the technical aspect, but there are areas where I probably can give value. So no, that's great. Thanks. Cool. There you go. I've asked. Now someone else must have a challenge.
Dante, I think you had a question.
Yeah, I did. I'm just trying to think about how to structure it, my question, but maybe I'll just talk out loud and maybe you guys will work out what I'm trying to ask. I guess my problem at the moment is I'm not getting time on the water myself, and then it goes back to like the people I'm trying to coach. Yeah, they are pretty damn good. So how are like other coaches managing that? Are they like I understand what Jamie was saying that, okay, you just facilitate and get the answers, but with your own professional development, I guess this is an example of how to professional develop and talk to other coaches. Is getting out on the water like things that other coaches are trying to do or trying to like test it out themselves, or how do they get the answers if they don't have? I'm fortunate that I can ask people questions, but like how do other coaches get the answers without asking other people? That's my question, I think.
That's a good question.
Jamie, you got some thoughts?
Yeah, I'm just thinking. It is a challenge, and it's a question like I've had as well, Dante. Like, should I be doing my own sailing so I know what that feels like and can empathize a little bit more with the sailors at times. But I think a big one for me, or a big part of the way I coach now, is just research questions and just having little think tanks on my own. So once you understand the general principles of angle of attack, distribution of depth, center of effort, you can kind of work out the answers. But I also hear what you're saying, like, would you have more value if you were experiencing that and practicing it? When I look at a lot of the other coaches at a high level in the space, I don't think many of them have time to do their own sailing. But I would still say they're really effective coaches. So I think it is possible to have a really big impact and not sail. But I'm curious to hear what other people think.
I know
Thanks,
for my
Jamie.
part,
That's great.
Yeah.
Thanks, Jamie. That's a great answer.
Oh, cool.
I know for my part, I struggle to get the time to go sailing. I navigate yachts. It's probably my area because it's the kind of thing you can drop into and do and put the racing brain into action. But that means I spend a lot of time downstairs not looking at the actual sailing part. And we're just having a laugh at Kingsley's comment because I'm a really mediocre wing foiler, along with a lot of the other coaches. I would say there's like a high level of mediocrity in the winging fleet. Probably like the best person winging in the Australian sailing programs running, like, because like now that he's not a coach, he gets to do it more. Maybe, I don't know, or at least more regularly. I think like it's a hard balance, Dante. And I think what I would say is you have to do the thing that you can do. So you have to, it's no use setting yourself the objective, I'm going to go sailing more often if you're not able to. What you can do though is think about what do you have access to? One of the big things I have maintained access to is that, like, I have friendships with people who are really good sailors, who are open-minded and who I can ask questions without fear of judgment. A couple of mates who, in particular, who, like, if I have a dumb question, I will ask them the dumb question, or I'll ask what they think of a particular situation. And I've got like friends who I do that with, like, depending on what the challenge is. So a particular friend who's a really like high level female sailor, like really good reference on what her experiences were and how she would think about things differently to how I would think about it. Or another friend who's like a bit of an engineering brain, how does he do it? And like, it doesn't even need to be like, they don't even need to be coaches or anything like that. Just how do they tackle a problem? And that, I think that even goes so far as like with the technical part of it. Like, if the challenge is around technical and you're struggling to get the experience with the class, is like at least just going, well, what I can do is try and understand the bits that I'm not understanding currently. So like, what is the challenge? What are the parts to it? And then who do I know that's like good at that? And so, you know, who is a really good boat handler in another boat that's kind of similar, or like who's someone at my yacht club who's really good at that? I have to talk to them. How would they challenge this problem? You're probably not going to get the answer necessarily, but it's going to trigger more and more thought and different thought, and get you out of your way of thinking, because all of us end up on a relatively fixed way of thinking on a problem. So it's like, just be open to challenge on it is how I deal with most of those problems, because it happens. The thing is, like, the further you go, the less answers there are. And which, if you're not comfortable with that, it's pretty hard. Because, and even the people who do have the answers are really good at keeping them secret. So, you know, becomes a bit more of a challenge.
I think one of the things that I'd love to see as well, like, obviously we try to do it in the best way we can with this format online, but I'd love to see in your own clubs or class associations just that kind of community of other coaches that you do know, getting together in this format and sharing. Like, it could be 3 of you having a coffee at the club and actually just doing a mini version of this face to face and just sharing a couple of ideas with each other, exploring different possibilities or different ways and challenges that people have found to overcome stuff as well, is something that I'd love to see fostered more throughout clubs and class associations, because I think that's the way that we will all grow as coaches in the country. The more that we share, the better everybody's going to get. So yeah, that would be my other thought on that.
Yeah, part of your question, Dante, was like, how do you find the answers without talking to other people? But I think that is a part of the answer. Like, I think you have to talk to other people if you want to go far with it, because each coach has a different strength and we all have our own blind spots. So I think there's so much value in, like, I think you have to. I don't know if there's an answer without that.
And I think it's hard as well. Kingsley, you sort of touched on this earlier with your comments, but it is sometimes hard to put yourself on the line. But I think as long as, if we can, as coaches in Australia, if we can build a community of like a culture of support, and that almost that there's no stupid questions, that the more we have that, the more people are going to be willing to ask a question and hopefully get an answer as well. So that would be my other sort of thought on that. I think in ask people, put yourself on the line, be brave, and see where that goes.
I'm aware we're kind of running over time, but if people have got questions, I've got at least another 20 minutes before I got to run out the door. So please feel free to ask some questions. Just having a great laugh at like any comment about falling off a wing floorboard. It's like me 101.
Like Brady said, if people do have other questions that people are willing to stay on and chat about anything, then happy to.
Yeah.
Otherwise, if everyone's exhausted their questions and thinking for tonight, we can probably look to wrap it up. Again, same as what I've sort of done at the end of all the other sessions. I'd love you, again, put it in writing, because if it's in writing, it means something. Either in the chat or email me later or tomorrow, however you want to put it down, and just share something that you've taken from tonight that you might be able to action in your own coaching and in your own environment would be awesome. I think if you write it down, it becomes real. If you don't write it down, it might not get actioned. So feel free to put it in the chat now or send me an email, whatever you want. Ash.
Hey everyone. Yeah, look, I think like just on that point, Ian, so you were talking a bit before about the community of practice, Dante's question around getting kind of that understanding or building it. It comes from a network predominantly, but it also comes from understanding sailing theory and principles and other bits and pieces. And so there's a lot that you can kind of go into to get better and be a better coach, have more knowledge, be better prepared for coaching. But specifically what I wanted to share was a point that came up a couple of times. And so to be careful of technical bias or class complacency, ask questions, and sometimes stupid questions. So, and almost come across as a little bit like honest and upfront, and you never know what people will answer back, because they might start to question what they're doing. And then the final part really being try and continually break the mold on their thinking by asking the right questions. That if we can do that, then we can seriously begin a different process of how people approach their own self-coaching. Because if X says that we have to do it this way, so everyone does it that way, so we have to do it that way, everyone's thinking on one person's thinking. And that's when you get class complacency. So yeah, I think that's critical. And then the community of practice, great point, Ian. That's where we have to go. If we truly want to be better as coaches, more of this and more of it formally in small groups where we can talk and actually address this past a few anecdotal bits that we pick up in a 1 hour, 10-minute scenario. That's it for me.
Awesome. Thanks, Ash. The next session, which will be sort of presented by Amelia Catt, is going to be on the 26th of September with the theme of inclusive coaching practices. So I will again send the meeting link out on the morning of that session. And thanks to everybody for joining us again tonight. So thanks everyone, and I'll stop the recording now.
Thank you all. That was really good.